Hey guys.
Hey, Liz.
Hello. How are y'all?
Okay. I think I have my volume up now.
Okay, Christy, I may have to have some coaching on how do I, well, I don't want to leave people muted unless we have a lot of background noise. So I guess they can individually mute themselves.
Yeah, they can individually unmute themselves, or if you go to the bottom of your screen,
Yeah,
click on the participants,
yeah.
and it'll bring up a little list of participants. And at the very bottom, it says unmute all or mute all.
Oh, got it. Okay. Ashley, you're muted on purpose?
Yeah, because Christy was talking, so I don't know what the background is in my house. So, good morning.
Okay. This is all new for all of us, so this will be great. So everybody doing okay?
I do have a 5-year-old that's doing his schoolwork at the dining room table with me. So if you start hearing him, let me know and I'll mute.
Awesome. We're all doing our thing. Hello, Emil. Are you there? I see Emil twice. Oh, there you go. Okay. Hello, Emil. He doesn't have his microphone on yet. So Christy, I just let you know I set up an individual Zoom account for my one-on-one coaching calls.
Okay.
So I can do those on it. The only thing that I'll need the Market Centers account is if I do a training session or something like that. The single, just the free account it's one-on-one unlimited time.
Yeah.
But if you have a group, it's limited to 40 minutes.
Right.
So it's pretty, and you can share your screen and all kinds of stuff. So it's pretty friendly for what
I have my individual account. That's why I have you up on my iPad, that I join your class from my individual account versus the company account.
Right.
So I'm not competing with you for the host.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so hopefully it's not just the three of us, but we'll see.
If it is, you can just come to our neighborhood.
That's right. And we'll drag Emil along. He sees. I'm glad Emil's with us, so that's good. Okay.
And I know I've taken your class, I don't know, a dozen times, but it is never too much information to listen to it again. So
I know.
It just join again.
And here's Sheila. Hi, Sheila. And Matthew. Hi. Glad you're here. I can't see.
I'm braiding it. I just finished working out, so I'm
Are you going to be incognito?
Yes.
Hey, I did my hair this morning. Come on,
Oh God, I'm trying to work out in between, so
good for you.
Everything going.
Good for you, Sheila. Good for you. I went to the office yesterday to pick up some things, and I have naturally curly hair, folks. I mean, like kinky curly. If you don't believe me, ask Karen. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, your hair is curly." I went, "Yes, ma'am, it is." It takes a lot to get it to look like this. Oh, good. But I still am in my yoga pants and flip flops, so that's good. Just a minute or two more, and then we'll get started. All right. Hey, Samir, how are you? Hi, Samir. Awesome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Did anybody venture out to the grocery store yesterday? We did. It was kind of weird. Still no paper goods.
It's crazy.
I know it is crazy. Fortunately, we don't need it right this minute, but I may have to pull my senior citizen card and go at like 6 o'clock in the morning one day.
One of my cousins is actually in ICU right now. Yeah, they told him that he had the flu. Yeah. And it's actually my cousin's husband. They told him he had the flu, but now his oxygen levels are declining, so he's in ICU right now, and it's here in Dallas.
God
And I'm
bless.
like,
I
I
tell you.
don't think people are taking it serious until they know someone.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary stuff. All right. Well, it's 9:33, so I think we're going to get started. We've got Tara, we've got Bill. So far, we've got 10 participants, and some more may come in. So I'm going to get started because I want to show you some things.
Good morning, Liz. This is Samuel. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Emil.
Oh, finally. I was trying to connect you guys for like 10 minutes. Oh, God.
And you can stay muted until you have a question if you want. So either
Okay.
whatever you want to do, okay? Just
Can you see me?
I cannot see you. You'll have to do something with your camera. I can't do anything with your camera.
1 second.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and so let me know if you don't see this. I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm not smart enough to do this. Okay. All right, everybody see that? Okay. I have a small screen. I wish I had my big one from work, so I'm going to scoot you way over there on the side. It won't let me do that. How bizarre. Okay. Okay, so
Can you see me now?
there you are. Hey, Emma. Good morning.
Good to see you, Liz.
You. Okay.
Morning,
All right.
guys.
I wanted to start by showing you some resources because while you're at home, I mean, there's so much that can be done, and I know that you all are aware of the Keller Williams Connect, the daily videos they're having. You can go on the intranet website or KW Connect website, and all of the 20, 30-minute snippets that they've been doing over the last week are all recorded there that you can go back and listen to. In fact, I was just reading an email from NAR this morning, and they specifically talked about Keller Williams and let me show you that email. There's a lot of opportunity to catch up and get some more information as well. Can you see that? Okay. Okay, so this is our NAR CEO, who knew? And so you can go down here, and each one of these has a article attached to it, how the stimulus package affects us, resources for property owners, ramp up coronavirus relief efforts, all this kind of stuff down here. I think this is adjusting your business to new normal. I think that's where it was. Here it is, right here. Keller Williams is transitioning its agents to work from home. Companies focusing, so offering live training, virtual training sessions every half hour. Anyway, so it's I am so proud of our company that we are on the forefront of facilitating our new normal and how we and how we do our business. And they're also having a shift book club based on our book Shift. So take advantage of this learning opportunity. Hey, we're stuck at home anyway. We might as well be, doing something, wonderful with our lives, right? So did you hear that we're going to have a happy hour quarantini this afternoon? So our little Jennifer sent out a notice that today from 5 to 7, here's the Zoom link. We're all going to make our cocktails and come join each other, which will be fun. Also, I know that you've probably been, and I have been passing on Christopher Sullivan's information that he's provided. It's been so helpful in his interpretation of the shelter at home or shelter in place or whatever that is, and what we can and can't do, if we're essential or non-essential, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so he's going to have an update for us this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Let me encourage you to tune in to that, because Dallas started out, they announced their policy on Sunday, then revised it again on Tuesday and revised it again on Wednesday. So as of right now, there's no open houses, which makes sense, in Dallas County, okay? And real estate is non-essential, so we are not even supposed to be showing houses in Dallas County, okay? So there you go. I'm not even going to go any further with that. So whether that's productive or not remains to be seen. Be sure and keep your eyes on the the calendar, why this pops up in October, I have no idea. But our wonderful Christy has gone to a lot of time and trouble to make sure that we have links to all of this wonderful stuff. Today, this is where we are now. If you want to pop in market update at 3 o'clock, here's the link. She's made it real easy for us. So thank you, Christy. That is just amazing. And she's going to be continuing to instruct via Zoom. So all this purple stuff is our wonderful Christy. And this other stuff, the black is Katie of RI. So just don't waste this time. Don't shut down, keep active, keep moving ahead. Also, the KW training site, and this is where we're going to go for the contract. We're going to move into our contract. You know where this is, Agent 296, and then the password. There's the password 2962 @!9. So we're going to log in. This is a wealth of resources for everyone. All kinds of stuff here, office resources, tech videos, contracts, and we're going to go to the Wonderful Family, okay? And just follow along with me. You don't have to do this on your computer. These are videos. This is a video. These are videos on each of the pages of this contract. So if you're writing an offer and you get stuck, I don't know what to insert in this particular block on page 5, watch this little video, okay? So, and I've used my cheater contract, I'll call it, and right down here, this is posted. It's a PDF file. So if you want a hard copy or online version of just to read through it, that's where it is. So make sure that you know where to find that. Okay, so we're just going to start off on this, and don't hesitate to stop me and ask me questions if you need more clarification. And can y'all see that okay? Everybody okay with that? Okay, I'm gonna.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna reduce these so I want to bump this up a little bit. Can I bump this up a little bit? How do I bump this up a little bit?
What are you trying to bump up, Liz?
Can I make this bigger?
You can open it in your PDF viewer.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Here it comes. Okay, this is a little bit bigger. Okay, it makes it easier for me to see. Okay, so, all right, so the parties of the contract, remember to use first and last names. Richard Smith, Susie Smith. Middle initials, if they normally, in the course of their business, driver's license, whatever, if it's Richard A. Smith and Susie R. Smith, then go ahead and use the initials as well. Not Richard and Susie Smith, okay? And then on the buyer, and this can happen on the seller side and the buyer side. If the buyer or the seller is a LLC or a trust or a company or something like that, we need the name of the authorized person to sign, that's authorized to sign, and make sure that you have validated, you have verified that. There have been case studies in Trek, and we don't want to go there, right? That the, I miss seeing you guys. No, that's not what I want. How do I put you back up there? Okay. How can I put the things back up there? The pictures.
That'll be in your Zoom meeting. So I think on the bottom, there will be like a little, it looks like a blue camera. Maybe if you hit that, then down a little, well, on my screen.
Right there. Okay. Yeah, that's not working. Oh, well, that's okay. Well, I made y'all go away, and so you get to see me and I don't get to see you. I keep popping music up. I don't want music. Go away, music. Okay, anyway, whatever. New share. Control settings. There we go. Okay. I don't know. I don't know how to do this. Anyway, so there you go. All right. So make sure that if it's Remarkable Properties LLC, make sure Mark Anthony, if he's the authorized signature, that he, that he can do what he can do. So, because people sign contracts, companies don't, right? Now, the company may be the buyer, company may be the seller, but we need a person that's authorized to sign the contract. Look, land, lot, block, all of that, look that up. Go to the tax records, realist report, that will be in that information, and it's imperative that that be submitted in there. This space is the subdivision name. Blank addition, that's the subdivision name. Windsor Heights, Chase Oaks, whatever that is. City of Coppell, County of Dallas, whatever. And then common street address, such as 123 Main Street. Go over the improvements and accessories carefully with your buyer and your seller. These same two paragraphs are on the listing agreement. Make sure they understand what is included, not included, what's going to stay, not stay. And if there's any question about that, that your buyer has, address it with the listing agent. If they want the refrigerator to say, ask for that, because it's not on this list, right? The refrigerator, washer and dryer, it's not on the list. And be sure and have that conversation with your buyer, because if they come from another part of the country, in other parts of the country, it's customary to leave the refrigerator, or it may be customary to leave the refrigerator, washer, and dryer. So make sure that their expectations are clear. And that they know what they're going to get and what they're not going to get. That's very important. I've seen things blow up and people get irritated, annoyed, and just almost violent after closing when they walk back into the house and what they thought was going to stay is all of a sudden gone. So be careful with that. Also, if there are already exclusions, it's got to be listed right here. Listing agents, don't make the mistake of getting all excited about executing a contract without that all house water softening system, or you name it, being in this paragraph. Because if it's not in the paragraph, then your seller has to leave it unless you negotiate it later. And I wouldn't count on it. I would never count on it, because both parties have to agree. Chandelier in the dining room. I literally have had a client, I've sold them like 3 houses, and they have a rose bush that was her aunt's, and they dig it up and move it to the next house. So be sure you set that expectation that the rose bush in the front flower bed is going to be gone when the buyers come back. Okay. Wall mount TVs are personal property. Mounts will stay. But make sure your buyer understands that the TVs will likely be gone. The mounts will likely stay unless it's been clarified by the listing agent. If the seller wants to take the mounts, they have to repair the holes. If they pull the curtain rods down, they need to repair the holes. Okay, don't leave gaping holes in the wall. It'd just be better if all that was taken care of, or make sure the expectation is set. List price. Down payment is down payment. Cash portion is their down payment. The paragraph B is what they're going to mortgage. Add those up, that's the sales price. Okay, so in this particular situation, they're putting $100,000 down. They're financing $300,000. So the sales price for this property is $400,000. And so make sure, if you've negotiated this and you go back and forth changing just the sales price, make sure that the math works, that you've redone that math, and these add up. Okay. License holder disclosure. I see this, and I'm sure Christy you have as well, in compliance. I see a name as a buyer or a seller, and the last name is the same as the agent's name. Okay, so if you're representing a family member, if you are a buyer or a seller, you must disclose. This Trek is real serious about this. It's on the list of how you can lose your license. Okay, this is not just a fine. This is how you can lose your license, is not representing yourself correctly. So, and you don't have to say that, you know, that the seller is your ex-wife's brother-in-law. Okay, you wouldn't even have to disclose that. But if he's your brother-in-law, all you have to say is the listing agent is related to the seller. You don't have to say in what way. Buyer's license, real estate agent, the state of Texas. Listing agent is related to seller. You know, whatever it takes. Okay. Earnest money. Typically, of course, we don't set this, it's all negotiable, but typically earnest money is 1% of the sales price. And so that's what I've used in this model. $400,000 sales price, we got a $4,000 earnest money. And it's deposited, the escrow agent is the company, not Samantha. Okay, you're not going to write your buyer's not going to write a $4,000 check to Samantha. Okay, they're going to write it to Republic Title. So Republic Title needs to be right here, and you can add the closer's name, but the escrow agent is the company, the title company, and then go ahead and insert their address if you have it. Clarify that with the listing agent, because how many Republic Titles are there in the Dallas area? A squillion. Okay, so you need to know specifically which office they're using. And then if there's any additional earnest money deposited, then you insert those. Now, how many days do you have to deposit the earnest money? That's a question. 3 days. 3 days, and it's typically business days, but look down here. If the last day to deliver the earnest money falls on a Saturday or Sunday or legal holiday, the time to deliver is extended until the end of the next day that's not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. Okay, so if you execute a contract today, tomorrow, Saturday, is day 1. So day 2 is Sunday, day 3 is Monday. The earnest money is due by end of business on Monday. Okay, if you executed yesterday, Thursday, today is day 1. Saturday is day 2, Sunday is day 3. Title companies are closed on Sunday, so that the earnest money is due Monday by end of business day. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about that? Really, Bob?
I have a question.
Yes.
And it's in regards to the sentence with buyer shall deliver additional earnest money. If
Yes.
they obviously don't have any earnest money that they're going to be delivering on top of the initial earnest money,
Right.
that one cannot be left blank, correct? It has to have NA in it.
It can be left blank, or it can put NA. A lot of times it depends on your teacher.
Okay.
You're in school, because a lot of teachers say don't leave things blank, and I understand that, and I agree with that. But it's neither.
It's okay either way.
It's okay either way. Now,
Okay.
if in the reason that you would add a second earnest money is if you had a backup contract. If this offer was going to be a backup contract, then you would put a little bit of earnest money down in order to be a backup, because you have to put down earnest money and option fee when you execute the contract, even as a backup. So you might put $100 down, and then $3,900 deposited within 3 days after and the effective date would be the amended effective date. And we'll talk about that when I've got some language that Don Moore gave to me that we can put in special provisions, if that's another conversation for another day. Also, what I have seen also is when you're dealing in luxury, a lot of times if it's $1 million house, $10,000 would be your typical deposit. They may do 5,000 now, and then 5,000 after the option period is over. Make sense? So they're not wiring, they're not tying up $10,000 at the top. Oh, God bless you.
Thanks.
So anyway, does that make sense?
Liz, can I ask you a question? Actually, in one of the classes I was on yesterday, it was brought up the idea, especially in Dallas County, where you cannot show a house that's not under actual contract.
Oh, yeah.
That some
Like
agents are
investment
using,
properties and stuff. Yeah.
they're using this section to put it under contract for like a $100 earnest money and $30 option fee.
Right.
To get it under contract, and then they're using the additional earnest money as like the actual earnest money if the contract keeps going through.
And that's typical. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's very typical as well. A lot of investment property that have a tenant in place, like if it's multifamily or something like that, they want you can't show the property unless they have an executed contract. And so that's when that example that Christy brought up. Very good. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Title policy. Okay. Generally it's the seller pays the title policy. That's just been traditional. Of course, as you see, there are 2 boxes, so it is negotiable, right? So in the situation that maybe the buyer would decide or offer to pay the title policy is if you know that if it's in a multiple offer situation and in that type of price range, in that type of market, the buyer may offer to pay for the title policy so that that's a little more, money that's left in the seller's pocket at the end of the day. So when you're counseling a buyer and you want them, you're helping them to write an offer that's going to be have a greater likelihood of being accepted, you can counsel them to do this, and they're going to go, okay, well, what's that going to cost me? Okay, so here I've put the note is the title policy is roughly, actually it's a little overestimate, but I'd rather overestimate than under, right? So it's roughly 0.8% of the sales price. So in this particular example, with a $400,000 sales price, 0.8% is $3,200. It's probably going to be a little bit less than that, but you can give them, it's going to be probably no more than $3,200. So your buyer knows, okay, what's that going to cost me? Okay. So that's why I put that there. And then the title policy is issued usually by the same company that's named in paragraph 5. Okay. All right, page 2. It goes through, now this list of items here is what is not covered in the title policy. The title policy guarantees certain things, but it doesn't cover restrictive covenants in the HOA. It doesn't cover exceptions for standby fees, taxes, and assessments. It doesn't cover liens, utility easements, et cetera. When it comes down here to number 8, the standard printed exception as to discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in area, boundary lines, encroachments, or whatever, that means if there's a mistake on the survey. That means if there's a mistake on the survey. Generally, the title company will not cover if a fence, if there's a mistake on the survey and the survey shows the fence is on the property line, but it's actually not on the property line, and your neighbor, your buyer's neighbor next door says, you know what, you need to move that fence or I'm going to sue you. Okay, because I tried to get the other guy to move it and he never would, and so by golly, I want that foot back, I want that fence moved. The title company would cover that. Okay, so that's what this number 8 means. I means that will not be amended or deleted. In other words, it's going to stay like it is. Okay, that it's not going to be covered, and the only reason that you would possibly do that is if the buyer had got a new survey so that the surveyor was somewhat responsible for his mistake and would hopefully take responsibility for remedying his mistake. II is offered so that it will be amended to read shortages in area. And that means that the title company, the title policy would cover those mistakes on survey, but somebody's going to have to pay for it if there's a cost involved, either the buyer or the seller. My opinion, it is, it's not my opinion, it is a lender required document. A survey is a lender required document. So customarily it would be a buyer cost, but depending on what market it's in, you can ask the seller to pay for it if you want to. So, but just so if you need to know what the cost is, so that you can consult your buyer and your seller what this looks like. The cost is 5% of the cost of the title policy. So looking at our example, it would be 5% of $3,200. You follow me? Okay. 5% of $3,200. That's the cost of the title policy for this $400,000 house. All right. So that's what that means. The commitment just says that the title company is going to deliver your commitment within 20 days to your buyer. And then number C, it talks about the survey, and this is the survey paragraph. So this is really important that you understand this. This is probably one of the most misunderstood paragraphs in the contract. If number 1 is checked within 5 days, if you put 5 to 10, whatever number of days you put there, after the effective date of the contract, the seller shall furnish. That means they must furnish to the buyer and the title company the existing survey of the property and a notarized T47 affidavit. Okay, they must. So if you're a listing agent, you need to make sure that before you put this house on the market, and for sure before you execute a contract, that you have whether or not the seller has a survey, and that they've done they've notarized the T47 and you've delivered it to that buyer. Okay. If you get an offer and they don't have a survey and you can't deliver it within those 5 days, this is what's going to happen. Bold. If seller fails to furnish the existing survey or affidavit within the time prescribed, buyer will get a new survey at seller's expense. Okay. So this means if number 1 is checked, the seller must have a survey. They must have one, and they must have had the T47 notarized so that they can be delivered to the buyer and the title company. Does that make sense? Is there any questions about that? When I'm on the buyer side, if I'm representing the buyer, this is I usually, when I'm working up an offer for an agent, I have, or on a property for a buyer, I have a pad, and I'm making my list of things that I need to talk to the listing agent about. This is one of them. I need to know, if it's not up on Matrix, if they haven't already offered it to you on Matrix along with the seller's disclosure and that kind of stuff in the transaction desk or documents or whatever they call it, then ask the listing agent, does your seller have a survey and a T47? If they don't, then number 2 needs to be checked, right? The seller can't deliver what they don't have, right? Let's back up a minute. I missed that last sentence. This is important as well. If the existing survey, okay, the seller does have a survey and an affidavit, and they have delivered it to the buyer and the title company and the lender, and the title company or the lender is decided it's not acceptable. So the buyer's going to have to get a new survey, and who's going to pay for it? That's what that sentence means. Okay. The reason that a title company or a lender would refuse a survey is if it doesn't have the current improvements on it. Maybe it's an old survey and they've built a pool, or they've expanded the patio, or they've added to the house, or they've built a shed in the backyard, some permanent structure that's not shown on the survey. So the title company and the lender may not accept it because those improvements don't show. Or if you're working with a seller and the survey that they have is 10, 15 years old, and you determine, I had one last year, they bought it 14 years ago, 16 years ago, something. And so since then, they had built a fence, they had put a shed in the backyard, they had done some things that would have altered the survey, would have made it incorrect. And so we didn't even offer it to the buyer because I knew it would be rejected. Okay. So we didn't even go down that road. I just put it out on the MLS that's saying seller does not have a current survey. Buyer will need to buy their own survey. And so when the offer came in, number 2 was checked. Okay. Does that make sense? So now this number of days, needs to be, generally the title company orders the survey, and they're not going to order it until the buyer gets outside their option period and has a pretty good idea that they're going to move forward. Because there's no point in ordering it and on day 3 and on day 7 they terminate, right? So that you have to take into consideration the length of the option period, and then probably another week or 10 days for the survey to be done. So this number of days may be 20. Okay. So just take that in consideration. Okay. Okay. Objections. This is really important. Now, this particular paragraph only pertains to the survey and the title work. However, if there's something on the survey or the title work that's going to prohibit your buyer from doing what they want to do with that house, then you need to make a note here in this section. And I think that if even the HOA would have a problem with it, go ahead and whatever they're going to do, go ahead and put it in that blank. Therefore, they've said it out loud what their intention is. And if they can't do it, then it's going to be real clear when the HOA documents come in why they're terminating. And let me give you an example. So this is about the survey, what I've made a note here. Build a 20 by 30 foot pool in the backyard, or build a 15 by 30 workshop in the northeast corner of the backyard, something like that. Are they going to raise chickens? Are they going to raise dogs? Are they going to run a business out of their home? Are they going to use it as a residential release property? Are they going to lease it immediately? Okay. Are they going to have work trucks parked on the street? Do they want to park their RV in the driveway? Think of all of these things. That ask them, have a conversation with them. That say, what are you going to do besides just live here? Are you going to run a business? Have a good conversation with them, and then put whatever they say that they're going to do in here. If they say, nope, we're just going to live there, okay, then you can leave it blank. Okay. So, and the reason you want to do that is if for some reason the paperwork comes back and there's an easement that doesn't show on the current survey, or maybe they don't have a current survey and the buyer's going to have to get their survey. Well, when that survey comes in and it shows a big fat easement through the middle of that backyard and they're not going to be able to build that pool, then you're going to be able to give that buyer an opportunity to object. Your buyer must object within 5 days of receiving that document. And then the seller has the opportunity to cure that objection. Well, if they can't move the easement, if they can't fix it, then your buyer can terminate and get their earnest money back. If you don't put anything in there, and then the survey comes in and the buyer goes, oh, well, we were going to build a pool in the backyard and this isn't going to work, then they've just lost their opportunity to object. Okay. So protect your buyer, protect your buyer, protect your buyer. Okay. Let's see. All right. Abstract of title. This is just a notice that we've given the buyer to get abstract of title or title policy. Down here, way down in the bottom of page 2, which is often overlooked, membership in a property owners association, yes or no, is or is not. Be sure and check that, because for one thing, when Christy is looking at this on compliance, she's looking at this box, and if is checked, then she's going to be looking for an HOA addendum. Okay, so make sure that you check that box appropriately. And then it just talks about that you are obligated to pay the assessments from a HOA and blah blah blah. And there's another form for that, which you'll be using. Tract promulgated form will be used. Statutory tax districts. This page, a lot of times, because there's really no blanks, we just kind of scoot by it. We just kind of scoot on through. But this particular paragraph right here, statutory tax districts, requires action. If the property is situated in a utility or other statutorily created district providing water, sewer, drainage, or flood control and services, it requires the seller to deliver and the buyer to sign the notice prior to the final execution of the contract. So where you go look for that, you go, well, how do I know, right? So you can go to the realist report or the county tax report, and you go down there to where who is collecting taxes. So you're going to see the city, the county, the school district at a minimum, okay? In Dallas, you're going to see a hospital district. Areas of Coppell and other places, there's going to be a flood control district, a MUD, PUD, RID, you name it, some other acronym. So if you see anything other than, in addition to the city, county, school, and hospital, ask the question. And who you can call is the title company. You can instruct your seller to call the municipality that's collecting that information, or you can call the title company, and oftentimes they know. Like there's certain areas of Coppell that has a flood control district, and the title company knows where those areas are and those subdivisions, and they have that information. This is not a form that we can fill out. It's something that has to come either from the title company or the taxing entity, because it requires their indebtedness and what the tax rate is and bond rate and blah, blah, some stuff that we don't have access to, okay? So ask the question if this is required. And actually, listing agents, do this up front. Do this when you take the listing. Ask the question. And if so, go ahead and get that document, have it filled out, and have it posted along with the seller's disclosure, and make sure that buyer and buyer's agent sees it, and the buyer signs it and sends it back prior to executing the contract. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that? Awesome. Okay. All right. All this other is just notices, transfer fees. Down here at the bottom, ask the question of your seller if the property is subject to a private transfer fee. Now, this is not a transfer fee associated with the small transfer fee associated with the HOA. This is a more of a private transfer fee. It's more of a developer type thing that's been set up that the developer set up. A lot of times it's to benefit the developer. Sometimes it's to benefit the funds go to the education trust of the school district that serves that location. I know Lantana has a transfer fee, and it's 0.5% of the sales price. 0.5% of the sales price. Okay, think about that. $400,000 home, it's $2,000, and it costs the seller. The seller has to pay it. Now, buyer's agent, what does that mean? Why should I care? Well, they're a buyer now, and they may be a seller at some point. They need to know that that's an obligation. So listing agent, you need to find out if this needs to be disclosed to the buyer, that there is a transfer fee. A lot of times, high-rise condominiums will have transfer fees, and that's mainly to fund the capital improvement fund so that they have money to make repairs and that kind of, plenty of repairs and plenty of money. Our tree pack did a great job lobbying the legislature a few years back, and the legislature passed a constitutional amendment prohibiting transfer fees. So there will be no more, but it didn't dissolve the ones that were already there. So the transfer fees that are in place get to stay there, but there won't be any more, okay? Propane gas system service area. This is a seller thing. This is on the seller side. But if you get an offer and you haven't provided this form, you need to do that. So propane gas system service area, there's an addendum for that. And that is out in Hazlitt and Saginaw and some outer areas where there are those communities that have like 2-acre lots. They may be right on the outside of where the city provides or where the Atmos or whatever has run gas service out to that area. There might be a private company that provides propane or gas to that particular community. So when your seller is filling out their seller's disclosure, make sure that they fill out that back page that includes the utility information. And if you see a water company that doesn't, not right here, but in another section of the contract, it covers a water supply system as well. But a water company or gas company that you don't recognize, Joe Smith propane service as their gas provider, then that's going to be a clue that they are included in a gas system service area. And there's an addendum for that. Okay. So just be aware of that.
Liz, one of the other areas that is subject to that is northeast Texas around Van Alstyne, Anna, Melissa, just north of McKinney is a big area of the propane area too.
Not surprising. It's when you get on the outskirts of where, there's the city services haven't maybe reached that far. Atmos hasn't expanded to that area, that kind of stuff. So good point. Okay, property condition, number 7. Take note, seller shall permit buyer and buyer's agents access to the property at reasonable times. Reasonable times. So if you have that buyer that wants to run over there every other day and measure for this and measure for that and take pictures of this and blah, 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 that's not reasonable. Okay, so reel them in and explain to them, look, these people, they're moving, they're packing, they're, they're living their life. They got things to do. We can't run over there every other day. Okay. So if you need to get contractors in, if you need to make, do measurements and that kind of stuff, let's set it all up within a couple of hours, one day, and make that appointment. They'll get in on the inspection. The buyer has access to the home during the inspection. They can measure then if they want to. But just make sure that they're reasonable. I've had calls from listing agents that say this buyer's agent's driving me crazy. They just want to come over all the time, and the seller gets crankier and crankier. Okay, so by the end of and the buyer wants to do a walkthrough, the seller's going, no, you've been in this house 14 times. You're not coming back. So just be reasonable. And also in this paragraph, any hydrostatic testing must be separately authorized by the seller in writing. There is a form for that. And hydrostatic testing is generally done like if the house has had foundation work done. This is one example of why the buyer would want a hydrostatic test. If the if the house has had foundation work done, maybe 5 years ago, there's a foundation warranty, but they want to make sure that, with any settling or anything additional settling, that that the sewer and the water pipes are still, in good shape. That, your buyer may request a hydrostatic test. It has to be agreed upon. Your seller has to be okay with that. And then in that test, in that form, it says if it causes problems, who's going to pay for the damage. So if that comes up, we can have a conversation about that. Listing agents, be sure that the seller at seller's expense will cause the existing utility to be turned on and keep them on during the time the contract is in effect. That means right up to the closing day. Okay, right after the option period, the seller can't turn off the utilities because there may be something else come up that needs to be checked. So they have to keep it on during the entire time the contract is in effect, and that is through closing and funding. Okay. Seller's disclosure, either they've received the notice or they haven't received the notice. Okay. If the listing agent can't provide, that's another question. Do you have the seller's disclosure? You've looked up on Matrix to see if they've posted it up there. It's not up there. So you ask the listing agent, do you have a seller's disclosure? Sometimes the seller, the buyer's agent gets overzealous and puts it on the market before the seller gets finished with his disclosure, and it goes under contract very quickly. If they can't provide it, then you check number 2. The buyer has not received the notice, and you're asking for it within how many days? 2, 3, 4, whatever. Listing agents, be careful with this. I wouldn't put a house on the market unless I knew that if they had a survey and a T-47 was notarized and that their seller's disclosure was completed. Because if it's not available and you can't send it to the buyer before this contract is executed, then the buyer's asking for it within like 3 days. The seller can deliver the notice to the buyer. If the buyer doesn't receive the notice, buyer can terminate the contract at any time prior to closing, and earnest money will go back to the buyer if your seller doesn't deliver it. If your seller does deliver the notice, buyer can terminate this contract for any reason within 7 days after the buyer receives the notice. So if you go under contract today and you've got a 7-day option period, so Saturday's number 1, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, so next Friday is day 7. Well, if Monday the seller finally finishes it up over the weekend, gives it to you, you give it to the buyer, you've just added days to the buyer's option, okay? Because Monday starts that day 7. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So you see what I'm saying? You've just added to the seller, the buyer's opportunity to terminate the contract. That's why it's so important to have it ready up front, and you can deliver it with the contract. Okay. Now, number 3, sellers not required to furnish the notice. There are a few reasons. If it's a foreclosure, a bank foreclosure or a HUD foreclosure, if it's new construction, if the house is in a trust or an estate, if it's a sheriff's sale, courthouse sale, that kind of stuff. All right. If an investor says, well, I've never lived in this house, I don't have to deliver a seller's disclosure. Yes, they do. Having not lived in the house has nothing to do with their obligation to deliver a seller's disclosure. Even if it's in an estate or a trust or something like that, and maybe it's someone has died and their son or daughter is the executor of that estate, okay, they technically don't have to deliver a seller's disclosure, but anyway, even the ones that are not obligated to, if they have any knowledge of to the condition of the property, they need to disclose it. Okay. If they know mom had foundation work done 3 years ago, they need to disclose that along with the warranties and all that kind of stuff. If they know that she's had issues, with this or that, fill in the blank, they need to disclose that. Okay. They're obligated to disclose any property condition that is required. Make sense? Okay. So seller's disclosure of lead-based paint, it was built before 1978. You must use that form, and it needs to be filled out in its entirety. Acceptance of property condition, generally we are an as-is state, so we most normally check that box. But in the event that there's some other things that might come into play, which is, this says, accepts a property as is, provided seller at seller's expense shall complete the following repairs and treatments. Like I said, most often you'll check number 1. An example of when you would check number 2, repair or replace the back fence that blew down in recent storm. So you've got a little couple, they're first-time home buyers, they're, FHA, they're barely getting in, they've got kids and dogs, okay? They don't have the money to replace or repair that back fence. It's a deal breaker for them, because if that seller won't do it, they can't buy that house because they won't be able to repair or replace that back fence, and that way they won't be able to enjoy that yard, okay? Or replace the roof damage by hail. If you know the hailstorms come through, a lot of times the listing agent has already listed on the MLS that seller is replacing the roof, insurance claim has been filed, some statement to that effect. Then you know that it's going to be done. Go ahead and put it right there that the roof will be replaced per, the seller's information or whatever. Okay, so go ahead and put it in there. Do not insert general phrases such as subject to inspections. It's too vague. It doesn't identify anything specific. And this is not the time to walk through the house and start forming an inspection list. These are the deal breakers. These are the ones that if this isn't done, the buyer doesn't even want to go under contract. They don't even want to waste their option fee. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Lender required repairs and treatments are the ones that come up generally during an inspection. FHA, VA, and even conventional sometimes has, they inspect and they have a certain standard. I mean, if there's a hole in the roof, the lender's going to want it fixed, right? If the foundation work if foundation problems are extreme, the appraiser is going to call it out and it's going to become a lender required repair. Okay. Wood destroying insect is another thing. If there's termites or something discovered, that's going to be a lender required repair. So neither party has to pay for those. The seller doesn't have to fix those. Sometimes the seller doesn't have the money. If that's the case, the buyer can terminate the contract and walk away. They can share the cost, and that can be expressed on an amendment. But that's what this is talking about, lender required repairs and treatments. Remember that roof that we talked about? If it's not insurable, then the lender's not going to lend on that property. If Gary doesn't, he's not with farmers anymore, whatever. So if Gary won't insure that roof, then the lender's sure not going to loan money on it. Okay, so that's a lender required repair. Make sense? Be sure and stop me if you have a question. Okay, completion of repairs and treatments. So this is really important, unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller shall complete all agreed repairs and treatment prior to the closing date, and all required permits must be obtained, and repairs and treatments must be performed by persons who are licensed to provide such repairs and treatments. Plumber, electrician, HVAC technician, so forth. If no license is required by law, this person should be commercially engaged in the trade of providing such repairs or treatments. Roofers aren't licensed, but it can't be your next door neighbor that has a ladder and a hammer, right? It's sometimes things you have to hire a handyman. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, you need to hire a handyman. If the seller says, I've got skills, I can do this, well, you get it in writing. The buyer has to agree in writing for the seller to make those repairs. I had a seller several years ago that they were buying a property that needed some repairs, and the owner of the property was a contractor. He was a builder. So we agreed in writing, they agreed in writing that the seller would use would either complete the repairs himself or use his contractors to complete the repairs. Had no problem with that. Did a great job. So that's what that looks like. So all the transferable warranties need to be transferred over. If anything's got to be replaced or anything like that need to be replaced, needs to be sent to the buyer. If the seller fails to complete any agreed repairs and treatments prior to the closing date, buyer may exercise remedies under paragraph 15. If the seller hasn't completed the repairs by the closing date, the seller is in default. Okay. If you got a list of repairs that this buyer and the seller have signed and agreed to, and the seller hasn't completed those repairs, the seller is in default. Paragraph 15 is the default paragraph. And they can either extend the closing date in order for him to get that signed, or the buyer can terminate and get their earnest money back. So caution your seller about dragging his heels. Okay. Environmental matters, it's just kind of an information thing. Residential service contract. That's your Home Warranty of America. That's your fixed OneGuard, American Home Shield, fill in the blank. That's what that is. And what I recommend if you're working with a buyer is that we have several that we have as preferred vendors in our office. And I recommend that you pull their, or give them their website to go look at, or if we've got flyers, pull their flyers. I don't know where any of that information is anymore, but I would send them actually to the website, because sometimes the flyers are outdated because they change their stuff every now and then. And give them 2 or 3 to look at and let them pick. Okay. None of them are perfect, and they need to understand what is covered and what is not covered. Okay. And have the correct expectation when they go into that relationship. And it's not your decision, it's theirs. And they need to do it pretty quick. It is said that the title company usually orders it, but you can order it too. You can go on those websites and place those orders. Make sure the title company is not obligated. They're not a party to the contract. So no harm, no foul. If it doesn't get done for them, it would be a problem for you if it doesn't get done. So make sure that gets done one way or the other, right? Okay.
Liz,
Yes,
just for information for everybody on the call, the vendor files, flyers, and information is in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet in the copy room.
Good to know.
And we have ordered all of the flyer hangers, and it will be being installed. It was supposed to be by the end of the month, but with what we've got going on, maybe a little delayed. But where the big billboard is in the drop-in area,
Yeah,
that
good.
is going to be taken down, and all of the vendor flyers and information are going to be on that wall where the big billboard is.
So are they going to be more sturdy than the last ones that started falling off the wall?
Yes.
And make sure it's not a 6'4" guy that puts those things up, because sometimes you can't even reach them.
Yeah. So
you go over there. If you can reach them, most of us will be able to reach them. So anyway.
Yeah. So hopefully that will be done as soon as possible. But if they do need vendor information, it is in the bottom drawer of the copy room where their mailboxes are.
Awesome. Love it. Okay. Broker's fees, it's on a different agreement. The closing date, this is the closing date. The closing of the sale will be on or before a certain date. Okay. or within 7 days after objections are made under paragraph 6T, blah, blah, blah. Either way, this is a hard date, okay? So if you're on July, of course I need to update that, but that's okay. Use your imagination. If you're on July 27th and the lender has not delivered the closing disclosure, you've not got to clear to close, you're not going to close on the 29th, just saying. Because that closing disclosure has to go out 3 days prior to closing. So you need to find out from the lender, well, actually before this, but you need to find out from the lender how long, where are you, dude? You know, we've got closing in 3 days or 4 days or however long that is. And he goes, man, I need, 3 more days, or I need 5 more days. You need to change this date, buyer's agents. You need to change this date to reflect when when the closing is anticipated. And you do that by using an amendment. You don't do, once this contract is executed, you don't touch it again. Everything you do is on an amendment. So you do it on an amendment. Also, sellers can be in default of the closing date. We've got one that is, he's having trouble clearing some liens or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but and they're not going to be able to clear those liens by the closing date. They need a few more days. And they're trying to get the tax report. Anyway, so the seller's in default, okay, because the title company can't get clear title because of some seller issues. So your seller can be in default too. So listing agent, if the date's screaming up on you and the seller hasn't been able to get clear title so that things can move forward, then listing agent needs to delay the closing date by the number of days that's necessary. Okay. So it can go either way. It can go either way. So don't let your party fall into default, because if either party is in default, the other one can terminate. Now the seller can terminate, get the buyer's earnest money back if the buyer's in default. If the seller's in default, about the only thing the buyer can do is terminate and get their earnest money back, or they can sue them. We don't want that to happen. So anyway, be careful with that. Possession. Oh, okay. Down here, let's don't skip through this. This is about, seller shall execute and deliver general warranty deed and that kind of stuff. Pay the sales price, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Down here, there'll be no liens, assessment, security interest against the property, which the title company is not going to clear it to close if they can't clear any of those out, so that your buyer is safe from that. Number 5 is that the property is subject to a residential lease. The seller shall transfer security deposits, if any, to the buyer, and the buyer shall deliver to the tenant a signed statement. This is after closing, acknowledging that the buyer has acquired the property and is responsible for return of the security deposit and specifying the exact dollar amount. So this is if the property is subject to a lease, okay? The seller needs to turn over the leases also, and that's in another part of the contract. And we'll look at that in a minute. Possession. Now, just so you know, if a property is under foreclosure and there's a tenant in place, that security deposit is gone. It's just gone. Okay. And there's an addendum for that. There's an addendum that informs the tenant their rights. If a property is impending foreclosure, but unfortunately, security deposit is gone. All right. So how that new owner is going to handle that, I don't know. But but just to let you know, it won't be transferred. Possession. Seller shall deliver to buyer possession of the property in its present or required condition, required meaning after repairs, ordinary wear or tear accepted, upon closing of funding or according to a temporary lease. You must check a box. You must check a box. I've seen a couple of contracts come through that they've just overlooked checking a box. Can you imagine that there could be some concern about when possession is taking place? So make sure you check a box. And if it's on according to a temporary residential lease, then you need to make sure that lease is filled out, signed by both parties, and completed. Make sure if there is a lease or anything, any type of tenancy issue or situation, that the insurance agents are notified prior to the change of ownership and possession. Because if a seller sells the house and stays in the house for a period of time, the insurance coverage may change. And if something happens during the time that they're a tenant, the seller is a tenant, then there may be some question as to whose insurance policy is supposed to make those repairs. So be sure that the buyer makes their insurance company aware of the situation, and the seller makes their insurance company aware. Okay. Leases, here's another thing. After the effective date of the contract, seller may not execute any lease, including but not limited to minerals, or convey any interest in the property without buyer's written consent. If property is subject to any lease to which the seller is a party, seller shall deliver to the buyer copies of the lease and any move-in condition form signed by the tenant within 7 days after the effective date of the contract. If an investor is buying a property with a tenant in place, they need that paperwork. You need to deliver that seller needs to deliver all that tenant paperwork, applications, leases, security deposit information, move-in condition form if there is one, there should be one. All of that kind of stuff needs to be delivered to the buyer. Special provisions, very seldom do you write anything in that special provisions. If you need to say, if you're writing an offer and you need to say something that's not included in the contract or any addendum that you know of, call me and let's talk about it. Okay. And if you're putting in a backup contract, like I mentioned earlier, I have some language that Dawn Moore, I keep trying to say Dawn Thomas, went to school with her. Dawn Moore wrote regarding the backup contract. And what it is, it just clarifies that the first earnest money and option deposit is upon execution of the contract. The second earnest money and option deposit is upon the amended effective date of the contract. Anyway, I've got that readily available, so just let me know. Settlement and other expenses. This is just listing the customary expenses paid by the seller and customary expenses paid by the buyer. Up here in 12A1B, it's giving the seller the opportunity to also pay an amount not to exceed a dollar amount or not, to be applied in the following order, which would be toward the buyer's closing costs, buyer expenses. I don't know what else to say about that. Now, there are lender limits to that. It can be anywhere from 3 to 6%, depending on the type of loan. So if the buyer is buying a property and maybe they're FHA buyer, all they've got is the 3.5% down. They don't have enough money for closing costs and to have the reserves that's required, to keep in their account. They may have to ask for closing costs or a portion of it, but make sure you talk to the lender to see how much that is. Okay. So here's another thing to think about. If you are contemplating, like if it's your family member or coworker or somebody that that you're contemplating giving a buyer a concession to. If it's a buyer concession, if you're contemplating giving, you're representing a buyer, you're contemplating giving part of your commission to, that falls into the lender limits as well. So if the seller is providing the buyer, like say $5,000 toward the buyer's closing costs, and you've agreed to give the buyer $5,000, is the lender going to allow $10,000 credit? That's something to be aware of. So if you offer, make sure you put a caveat in there that it may be limited to the lender's approval. It's contingent on lender's approval. Very important. There's an agent that was not in our, well, she was in our office. She left the office. She was gone a couple of years, and she did one, and she was going to give, it was a very expensive home. She agreed to provide it was a new construction, agreed to provide a concession to the buyer in the amount of $7,500. And the seller, the builder also kicked in some money. Okay. So that at the end of the day, she could not add her $7,500 to the buyer's closing costs because that exceeded what the lender allowed. Okay. So, I mean, she couldn't give it to them, but she made a promise that she would. So after closing, she got sued by those buyers. And so they collected that $7,500 plus court costs and attorney's fees because she misrepresented and she promised something she didn't deliver. So don't think you're off the hook if it exceeds the lender limits. What she could have said when she, hopefully she put it in writing, she probably didn't, but if you're going to do that, make sure that it's contingent on lender approval, or the limits that the lender will approve before you do that. Okay, make sense? Okay, down prorations, taxes for the current year. I'm sure you understand this. If you close on 7/15, July 15th, the seller will be responsible for the taxes, HOA fees, whatever else they, customarily pay. That's usually about it. From January 1 to July 15th. And that will look like the seller giving credit to the buyer on the closing disclosure for that amount of taxes, okay? So that the buyer has that money, or it's pulled into the escrow account, so that when the bill comes in October, November, that the escrow account has enough money to pay for the full year. So the buyer will be responsible for July 15th through the end of the year. And so they'll pay for that portion, and they'll have the seller's portion in order to pay the full year of taxes, okay? HOA is paid ahead. So what that looks like is the seller will be credited from January 1 to July 15th, and then the buyer will pay. It'll come from the buyer. The buyer will pay for the seller's portion that they've already paid from July 15th to the end of the year. That taxes are paid in arrears. HOA fees are paid ahead. So the prorations will be figured accordingly. If it is be cautious if you're working with a senior citizen or disabled or veteran that may have an added exemption, not just a standard homestead exemption. Make sure you work with your title company to make sure that they apply, when they're prorating taxes, that they apply those exemptions to the proration, what they're collecting from that veteran or senior citizen or disabled person. Okay, they shouldn't pay retail when they're only obligated for wholesale pricing. Okay, so just make sure you have that conversation, because title companies get kind of in a routine, and they just take into consideration the homestead exemption, but they may not take into consideration any of the other exemptions. So protect your seller on that. Okay. Casualty loss: if any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire or other casualty, the seller shall restore the property to its previous condition as soon as reasonably possible, but in any event by the closing date. If they can't do it by closing date, and it's beyond the seller's control. Sometimes if there's hailstorms that go through a certain area, the the insurance companies, the adjusters, and the roofers are all overwhelmed. And so a lot of times things can't happen by the closing date that may be in 2 weeks, right? So if they fail to do beyond the seller's control, buyer can terminate and get their earnest money back, or the buyer can extend time for performance up to 15 days, or will be extended as necessary. Okay. Or they can accept the property in its damaged condition with an assignment of the insurance proceeds. Now, having said that, it says if permitted by seller's insurance carrier, and then receive credit from the seller at the closing of the deductible amount. That used to happen. That rarely happens anymore, okay, because there's been too much insurance fraud. Buyers will take the money and then decide not to make the repairs. So they've changed the insurance laws. That the roofer has to collect the deductible. I had one a couple years ago that the insurance company would not release that property unless they saw that the repairs are done and they saw a paid in full invoice from the roofer that it was done. Okay, so that's changed. Okay, that has changed in practice. We still can if they would do it, but in practice, it's changed. It just is. So mediation, they always encourage mediation before you go to civil court. Attorney's fees, basically loser pays. All right. Escrow, this is talking about the title company. They're not a party to the contract. They don't have liability for the performance or non-performance of the party. It's just kind of their not my fault kind of thing. Okay. They're just facilitating. Expenses will be the earnest money will be applied first to any cash down payment and then to the buyer's expenses, the closing costs. Anyway, then it talks about what happens to the earnest money and that kind of stuff. So if somebody is in default of the contract, this is in the demand. If a buyer decides to terminate the contract or the seller decides to terminate the contract, either party or the escrow agent may send a release of earnest money to each party. Generally, whoever terminates the contract, they will send the release of earnest money. If the buyer is terminating during the option period and they're using the notice of buyer's termination of contract, they've checked the correct box, and they do a release of earnest money and to the buyer, send it over to the seller, the listing agent, and the title company, then that's a pretty clean deal, okay? Where it gets interesting is if one party thinks they're right and the other party thinks they're right. And of course that happens sometimes, okay? So this is when there is a demand. This creates demand. So if either party right here fails to execute the release, either party may make a written demand to the escrow agent for the earnest money. If only one party makes written demand, the release of earnest money, escrow agent shall promptly provide a copy of the demand to the other party. In other words, they're going to get the other party involved. If the escrow agent does not receive written objection to the demand within 15 days, then the escrow agent may disperse the earnest money to the party making the demand. So usually they don't, because that release of earnest money releases all parties, including the title company, to any other obligation. The title company doesn't want to get caught up in the middle of an argument between the buyer and the seller who should get the earnest money. So they're playing Switzerland, okay? They're wanting to stay out of it and stay neutral. So generally they won't release earnest money unless that other party just goes dark, and it may have to go 30 days before they're willing to release the earnest money. So be careful with that. Now, damages becomes very important. So if you've got a buyer that is terminating rightfully and correctly according to the contract and the notice for the buyer's termination of contract, the correct boxes is checked. They're not making stuff up. They're not in default. Okay. And they send it over to the title company and the seller, and the seller wrongfully fails or refuses to sign the release that's acceptable to the escrow agent within 7 days of the receipt of the request, they will be liable to the other party for damages, earnest money, reasonable attorney's fees, and all costs of suit. Now, the buyer has to sue the seller, but they can collect a lot of money, more than just the earnest money. Okay. So if you've got, and sometimes the situation is if a lot of times financing, if the financing falls apart at the last minute and the seller has hung in there for 21, 25, 30 days, however long that financing period that you've provided for in the third-party financing addendum, and they've taken their house off the market, they've passed up other opportunities, and on the second to the last day of that financing period, the lender just can't get it done and they terminate, that seller is likely going to be irritated, right? And they're going to go, they've tied up my property, and then anger and all that kind of stuff. So that's okay. If you're representing that seller, the seller has 7 days to pout, and then they better sign it, or that buyer can take them to court and collect substantially more than just that earnest money. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. That's what the contract provides the buyer, whether the seller agrees with it or not. That's just they agreed to it in the contract. All right. Having said that, the seller something can come up in their past, an IRS lien that wasn't readily, available to the lender. Maybe the probate, a will hadn't been probated, or there's some muddy water in airship issues or something like that that would delay on the seller side, that would delay closing. Same thing. That buyer, if they can't, if the seller wants to terminate and just get out of that and regroup, and the buyer goes, no, I want to buy this house, I'm not going to terminate. Well, they have a right to, because they can't deliver clear title. They can't keep the buyer's earnest money, but they have to terminate. Okay. So the buyer can collect the earnest money. The seller's in default. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So actually the seller doesn't have the right to terminate in that situation, but they may need to. The buyer can refuse to terminate. They can terminate and get their earnest money back because the seller's in default, or they can just hold the seller hostage till they get it cleaned up. So it's, there's got to be some give and take there. Okay. The seller can terminate if the buyer can't close due to their financing or some other way. And if the seller, after closing day, if the buyer can't close, the seller may elect to terminate, and the buyer can refuse to sign, but if he can't close, then he's in default. You see what I'm saying? So anyway, neither here. Okay. Federal tax requirement. Okay. How's everybody doing out there? Everybody okay? I've just been yakking up a storm. All right.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. Federal tax requirement. We're not going to dive deep into this because this is a rare but very important situation that can occur. If the seller is a foreign person, as defined by the Internal Revenue Code and its regulations, or if the seller fails to deliver an affidavit or a certificate of non-foreign status to the buyer that they're not a foreign person, then the buyer shall withhold from the sales proceeds an amount sufficient to comply with the applicable tax law and deliver the same to the IRS. The buyer shall withhold. The buyer shall withhold. And the reason it's the buyer, if the seller's a foreign person, the IRS can't go after the seller because they likely don't even live in this country. Okay. The only one that they can go after to collect that tax is the buyer. Now, if the buyer's foreign, hadn't really thought about that. But anyway, and this is generally a situation. Here's one that we had a couple of years ago. It was a Mexican national. She lived in Mexico. She never lived in the United States. She may have traveled here for vacation or whatever, but she bought a house for her niece or granddaughter or somebody to live in while they went to college, okay, for a period of time. So, and she paid cash for it, which normally that's the case because they can't, if they're a foreign person, don't have residency or anything like that, it's really hard for them to borrow money. So a lot of times it's, they just paid cash for it. Maybe they're buying investment property, okay, to rent out because they want to invest in United States real estate. So because it's safer than in their country. Severe. So this grandmother was the granddaughter or whatever moved out. She went on with her life and all that kind of stuff. So the grandmother wanted to sell the house. Well, she is exactly, poster child for this paragraph. She was a foreign person. There had to be, we had to get a tax accountant, and I think they used a tax attorney as well to determine to make application to the IRS. There's a form for that. The title company is not really going to facilitate that for you. That's beyond their scope of work. Now they'll reserve those funds and they'll send them to the IRS, but that's about it. So what they did was they had and I have a CPA that specializes in this foreign person, this FERPTA ruling, and he can help this seller determine what it needs to be reserved. And it can be up to 15% of the sales price. Now it can be reduced if the buyer is buying it for a homestead and that kind of stuff. So that's why it's so important to upfront, before you even put it on the market, to unwind that, to get in touch with a tax CPA that can help you help that seller file that form, get it back from the IRS. The IRS will determine based on the application how much taxes need to be reserved, and then you can put it on the market and inform the title company that this is what needs to happen and move forward. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you get in that situation, I have allergies, my nose is itching so bad. If you get in that situation, let me know and I'll put you in contact with the CPA that I know, okay? Any questions about that? All good? Okay. Notices. All notices from one party to the other must be in writing and are effective when mailed to, hand delivered, or transmitted, or electronic transmission as follows. This is my biggest bugaboo. I mean, I'm just like, come on, people. If you're the buyer's agent, I rarely see the buyer's agent not put some information in there, which thrills me. So what you've done, you've provided to the seller where they need to send notices to. But if the seller doesn't fill this in, where are you going to send notices? Okay. So, and if you send it over there, Mr. Buyer's agent, to the seller listing agent and expect them to fill it out, and you get it back and it hasn't been filled out, you need to put some information in there. Because if you have a notice in the title company, all the notices within 3 days, send notice, demand, release of earnest money, blah, 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 blah. That's the notices that we're talking about. And this is the location that we're supposed to be sending those notices to. And so if there's nothing here, and Mr. Buyer Agent, if you send something to the listing agent and for some reason the listing agent claims that they didn't get it, then you may have just put your buyer in default. Okay, so it's very important that you pay attention to that. So at the very minimum, put the property address if the sellers live there. Okay, put insert the listing agent's email address. You have that. That's on the MLS. Insert whatever seller information that you might have, but at the very minimum, put the listing agent's email address, because likely that's where you're going to be delivering that notice. Does that make sense? Please don't leave this blank. Christy, do you ever see this blank? All the time.
More times than I would ever want to.
And we're not going to just do it.
I get at least one a day that's not filled out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're likely the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent's chosen not to fill in the seller. Or sometimes the listing agent, our listing agent, the buyer sent it over there and left this side blank, and our listing agent didn't put in their information, and they should have. Okay, so anyway, agreement between parties. This is a very important section, okay, because this contract contains the entire agreement of the parties and can't be changed except by their written agreement. You can't add a form or remove a form except by your written agreement, and that's on an addendum, okay? So the addenda, which are part of the contract right now, is generally the third-party financing if they're getting financing. If they're in an HOA, there's an addendum property subject to an HOA, and whatever else might be involved. Are they selling a house? Addendum for sale of other property. Are they reserving minerals? Are they offering a backup contract? Are they asking for hydrostatic testing at this point? They may do that later, but are they providing a lender's concerning right to terminate during lender's appraisal? You see what I'm saying? Here's a short sale addendum, lead-based paint. So check whatever is appropriate when you're making the offer and you're going to execute. Because if anything else comes up later, if you want to add a seller's temporary lease, if you want to add it right now, then you check the box, okay? But after you've executed, if the seller decides they want 3 or 4 days, then you have to do an addendum to add the seller's temporary residential lease to the contract. You see what I'm saying? Because this is what this says. It contains the entire agreement, and that cannot be changed except by their written agreement, and that's using addendum. Okay? Got it? Okay. Termination option. Very important paragraph. For nominal consideration and the receipt of which is hereby acknowledged in buyer's agreement to pay seller an option fee. An option fee within 3 days, calendar days, after the effective date of the contract. Seller grants the buyer the unrestricted right to terminate the contract by giving notice of termination to the seller within a number of days after the effective date of the contract. Notices, remember there's notices again, under the paragraph must be given by 5 p.m. local time where the property is located by the date specified. In other words, if your buyer is in the option period and they decide to terminate, they must terminate before this 10-day runs out. If they terminate on day 8, you have to provide the notice on day 8. If you screamed up to the last day of the option period and you're on day 10, then you have to deliver the notice by 5 p.m. on the last day. All right. If no dollar amount is stated as the option fee, so can you have an option fee without paying an option money? No, you can't have an option period without paying an option fee. If no dollar amount is stated as the option fee, or if the buyer fails to pay the option fee to the seller, if this information is in here, but the buyer doesn't deliver, buyer's agent doesn't deliver the fee within the time prescribed, the paragraph will not be part of the contract, and the buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate the contract. If the buyer gives notice of termination within the time prescribed, the option fee will not be refunded. However, any earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So a lot of times, particularly in a backup contract, I hear, well, do I get my option fee back? No, because you paid that fee so that you would have the unrestricted right to terminate the contract during the option period. Okay. That's why you paid the fee, so that you could do it. It released you from that binding contract. It gave you the opportunity to get out of that binding contract. And then you do have, if the buyer follows through, the option fee will or will not be credited to the sales price at closing. Okay. Time is of the essence, no exceptions. The one that most recently in this happens, they went under contract on Friday. They had the house inspected on Saturday. They hadn't paid the option fee yet. Oh my gosh, don't let them inspect without the option fee being paid, because here you go. They terminated on Monday with no option fee paid, no earnest money paid. Seller didn't have much leverage. He had no leverage because they didn't pay an option fee and they didn't pay earnest money. So they didn't have the unrestricted right to terminate and get their option and get their earnest money back. They terminated, they were in default, but there was no earnest money that the seller could keep. So be careful with that. There are agents that will play that game. Don't be that agent. But there are agents that will play that game. And it's more often than not, it's an investor that doesn't want to tie up his money or spend any more than he has to. So be careful with that. Don't let, if as a listing agent, don't let an inspection take place until that option period, until option fee and earnest money are deposited. In my opinion, that's just me. If they call and want to, on day 2 and want to inspect, I would ask, have you deposited the earnest money? And I haven't received the option fee. When that's done, you can inspect, because that's the only leverage the seller has, is the option fee and the earnest money. Okay. My opinion, just my opinion. Okay. So executed date. The executed date is inserted by the agent whose client is the last party. I'm seeing right here, is the last party to initial any changes and sign, is the one who inserts the date. However, if for instance, if on Saturday night, you and another agent are texting back and forth, hey, I sent, you're the listing agent, you sent it over there. And we had an example, Debbie Gill, she was a listing agent, she sent her seller agreed to the buyer's, I think they made an offer, the seller countered, and then the buyer countered back or something. Anyway, so the seller went ahead and initialed all the changes and then dated or signed the contract. But some of those changes were the seller's changes, so the buyer had to initial the last of the changes. Okay, so like 9:30, 10 o'clock on Saturday night, the buyer's agent let Debbie Gill know that, hey, my buyers have initialed the final changes. You know, we have ourselves a contract. Okay. So when was the executed date? It was Saturday, because the 4 elements were satisfied. One is that it was it was in writing. It was unequivocal. That means that no other changes were made, and all the signatures, initials, everything was in place as it should be, and that it was acknowledged. The buyer's agent let Debbie know, hey, my buyers have initialed everything, all the signatures and initials are in place. We have a contract. That was the final element that had to take place. That means that when that happened, they had a executed contract, which was Saturday. So Debbie goes, great, send that back to me and, you know, we'll be good to go. Well, he didn't email it to Debbie until Sunday morning, and he didn't put a date on it. He should have been the one to put the date on it, because he was the last one that had the last party to initial any changes. Okay. So Debbie took it, initialed, or put Saturday's date on it, and sent it to the title company and the other agent. Well, apparently the agent didn't look at it. Okay. So he's thinking Sunday is day one, or Sunday's the executed date, but it was actually Saturday. So even the title company took it and they did like a effective date, you know, like a timeline, you know, here's the executed day. This is when the option fees due. This is when the earnest money's due. This is when the title commitment will go out, blah, blah, blah. Even when's the option period over, that kind of stuff. And apparently he didn't look at that either, because he still was going on the date, the executed date being Sunday, but actually the Sunday was day one. So on what he thought was day 7, his buyer terminated the contract, but it was actually on day 8. So of a 7-day option period. So we went through a week of fighting over the earnest money, because by all rights and purposes, the seller should have, the buyer was in default because they terminated the contract outside the option period, and they had no other out at this point. However, it was the buyer agent's mistake, right? So we finally, and Debbie put it back on the market. It went back under contract. So that made the seller feel better. And she convinced him to go ahead and release the earnest money back to the buyer, because the buyer shouldn't be penalized for the agent's mistake, right? But it was a learning experience for that agent, because they nearly lost their buyer's earnest money. Sometimes it doesn't end as well. So make sure that you know that's how important this is. All through this contract, do you get that this is kind of important? It's a legal binding document. We need to know our stuff, guys. We have to know our stuff, and we have to know what we're doing. We have to be able to protect our buyers, protect our sellers, and advise and consult them, you know, in every way possible. Got it? Okay. Get off my soapbox. Page 9. Make sure this information is correct and filled out completely. A lot of times our system won't auto-populate correctly. It'll leave blanks. It'll put the brokerage license number in as your license number and vice versa and all that kind of stuff. So make sure that you proofread this, okay? And make sure all of these numbers are filled in and they're accurate. Okay, just for fun, what if, and I want some language, I want to hear people on this one. What if, Ashley, you sell a listing of Christie's? How is this? That's no fair. You haven't even done one. But anyway, we can work with you on that. So how would page 9 look? So you're filling out the offer. That's not fair. Okay, let's switch
No,
place.
I'll do it. I'll do
Okay.
it. I mean,
Okay.
I'll try it. I'll attempt it.
Got it.
So page 9 would look like, I mean, they would both be the same brokerages,
Right?
brokers firm,
Yeah.
name, license number. The associate's name on the left-hand side would, am I the seller or is she the seller?
Okay, she's the seller, but remember, it's one brokerage. You're an intermediary. You have one brokerage. There is no other broker.
Oh, so it would be everything would be filled on the right-hand side.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
right. That's right. And I see that. I mean, but we see it the other way more often than not, quite
Oh,
frankly.
where they're both filled?
Yeah, both fit. But
Oh.
the point is, in what you picked up on, there is no other broker. There's only the listing broker firm, which also represents the seller and the buyer as intermediary. Got it?
Okay. And then just the listing associate's name would be hers.
Right.
And then my would be the seller associate's name.
That's right. Selling associate is the one that represents the buyer. The selling associate is the one that represents the buyer. So this would be your information down here. Now, the reason we have a separate office and all that kind of stuff, think about Ebby Halliday. They have how many offices in the Dallas-Fort Worth area before they sold to Berkshire Hathaway? Anyway, they have, but they have one broker. So it may be, the listing broker may have been the one on, in Dallas, and the selling broker may have been the one in McKinney. You know what I'm saying? So it could be, different ways. Now our office, I'm the only broker. So this would only be for if we are having an in-house sale. There are other Keller Williams offices that have one broker that's over 6 or 8 offices. And that would be, they'd have to know who their broker is and to see if it would be intermediary or not. Make sense? Okay, cool. Awesome. Now, option fee. Who can receipt the option fee? Right there. Who can receipt it? Talk to me.
Listing broker or whoever the listing broker designates as their rep.
That's right. Or the seller.
Yeah.
Not the title company. Not the title company. Don't deliver it to the title company. You're putting yourself and your buyer at risk, and you're putting the title company in a place where they don't need to be. They're not a party to the contract. They are not authorized to receipt anything but the earnest money. The only thing they can receipt is the earnest money. So I'm hearing too often with agents that, they're in a virtual company, they have no office, they're out of town on vacation, sellers have moved, there's no one to receive the earnest money. If we're going to be in that situation with, now our situation, they can deliver it to the office. Okay. But if it was a situation like that, you've got to help them out, help out the buyer's agent. You're trying to sell a house. They're trying to do what the contract tells them to do, help them out, meet them somewhere, facilitate the transaction. Don't be a barrier to the transaction. So, but I've had agents call me, go, give me just that scenario, virtual company, agents out of town, sellers not around. We have had to be very creative with the way we do things. And we've used Zelle, we've used Venmo, we've used, all kinds of things to deliver option fee and earnest money because of our situation of option fee particularly. However, one of our agents said the other day that the buyer's agent Venmo'd him the option fee personally. Well, You can't.
Isn't that commingling?
Yes. So
Okay.
why that buyer's agent thought she could do that, I have no idea. He goes, what do I do? I said, well, she's got to send it to the seller, you know, get the seller to set up a Venmo or Zelle or something like that account. And she's got to send it to the seller and send that money back to her. You can't accept money and then turn around and give it to the seller. That's commingling. You can't do it. So, and sometimes we have to educate the other agent in this situation because a lot of times they don't know. So, anyway, you know, be creative, find a way, all that stuff. And that's application fees for tenants, you know, in situations like that as well. You know, the tenant can Venmo the landlord or whoever's got, or you. Now you can accept application fees if you're going to be the one running the background check and you're going to be the one paying for it. Okay, you can accept the application fee. If your landlord, if your property owner is going to be paying for the application fee or paying for the background check, then they need to send it to him. Got it? So so be careful about that.
Liz, I have a situation that came up yesterday that I think is a perfect example for some of the agents on this call. Our listing agent at the office got a phone call from a buyer's agent that said, I have FedExed you the option fee. Here is the tracking number.
So they put it on them to track it. Nice. Well,
and the FedEx package was lost.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
They can't find it.
So make sure you're acting in the best interest of your client.
So in that case, there is no option period.
Yeah, the buyer didn't act in what's best in the best interest of his client. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that the buyer can still inspect, the buyer can still present a repair amendment, they can still negotiate repairs, but the buyer just doesn't have the opportunity he doesn't have an option period. Okay.
But luckily in this situation, they are closing before the end of the month, but in reviewing the compliance, they did not have an option fee receipt because there was no option money received.
Yep. And that can happen, but that doesn't mean that the buyer can inspect, they can present, you know, they just don't have that unrestricted right to terminate the contract. Now, if a buyer needed to find another reason, sometimes they can find another reason, particularly if there's an HOA. Because if the HOA documents are delivered, the buyer has 3 days to terminate the contract. So there's other ways to get out of the contract. But if there's no HOA and they're a good, solid finance buyer, and the lender can't find a way to get them out of the contract, then they're stuck. So anyway, okay, earnest money contract that's receipted by the title company. If we represent the buyer, the earnest money can be wired. Right now, they prefer it being wired as opposed to dropping it off at the office. So make sure you contact the title company and find out what that needs to look like, because it's got to happen in 3 business days, right? And you can email them the contract, and then they can email you back the receipts. So make sure we stay on top of those timelines for what's required. Okay. All right. That was let's see, not too bad. Well, 2 hours. It's always 2 hours. I don't know how I get it 2 hours, less than 2 hours, but anyway. So any questions, my friends? Nope. Okay. All right. Peace out, group. Stay safe. Call me if you need me. I'm here just hanging out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you, Les. Bye-bye.
Bye.